morning, everybody. Thank you, Joel, and many thanks to GreenBiz. And I just also want to let everybody know that I am a native New Yorker. So, I'm born in Manhattan and live in Brooklyn now. I'm very proud of it. So I'm going to talk to you about supply chains and food. And what we're seeing right now, I think many of you are involved in supply chains in many ways. We're seeing real transformation, or the beginning of a redesign around supply chains. And traditionally, you look at a supply chain like this is food, but it's similar for a lot of different products. And all of these steps or pieces were little black boxes, right? So the consumer, if they're thinking about food, like Kellogg Foundation did a study that said, the consumer sees food as arriving from the retailer to their fridge to their plate. There's no before and after. The buyer said, I want to see the product show up at my factory gate with these specs. The trader did some sort of magical stuff in the middle, and the farmer actually never even saw or knew where his or her product was going. All very black box. But what we're starting to see is a real transformation of this, a redesign, and Rainforest Alliance has been working on mainstreaming that redesign in food, among other areas. So let's talk about the food industry. Joel mentioned that they're a very high-impact industry, uses 60% of the world's fresh water, is responsible for 70% of the world's deforestation, 30% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Most of the people working in agriculture live under the poverty line, and yet 7 billion of us need to eat. So a very important industry for all of us, and one which has huge impact. What we're seeing now is the recognition of the huge risk in supply chain to food companies. And we're seeing mainstream commitments to transforming those supply chains to make them more sustainable. Rainforest Alliance is working with thousands of companies. These are a handful. And let me just right away apologize for anybody who's here, who we work with, who's not up here, just so we get that out of the way. Because there's a lot of great companies really making 100% commitment to sustainable transformation across their work. And let me just finish on this and say, so what is it that Rainforest Alliance has been able to do with these companies to really do transformation? Because right now what we're working on is we've got 15% of the world's bananas certified, 7% of the world's tea, 3% of the world's coffee and cocoa, and we're working in 30 crops across 30 countries, and that's growing exponentially year to year. So what is the secret of engagement around that change? Why is that happening? And I'm going to say something which will cause you to snore, which is multi-stakeholder engagement around a comprehensive farm management system. All right? But actually, that is the secret. And let me tell you why that is actually not boring and is really exciting and transformational. So what we're seeing with Rainforest Alliance doing this certification using the Sustainable Farm Management System across the world is on farms increases in yield of 20% or more across small producers to large producers. This is an example of a third-party case study that looked at farms, coffee farms in El Salvador, and saw that Rainforest Alliance certified farms yields went up 76%. They got certification premiums of $1 million. And overall, they went from a very small net income to a really significant net income per acre. Now, these are for very small coffee farms, but we're seeing very similar things even if you're a big producer. Chiquita, who works with us, when they got all their farms certified, saw a 27% increase in yield and a 12% decrease in cost. We're seeing that in all the sectors that we're engaged in when you apply a comprehensive farm management system. What other kind of difference does this, comprehensive farm management system make? When you're looking at a farm, typically many farms have huge problems with water, as we heard, with waste, with poor living conditions and working conditions, with sort of eradication of biodiversity, soil erosion, deforestation, et cetera, chemical pollution of water, and worker illness associated with that. So the Rainforest Alliance standard covers all of those issues, and what you start to see is a transformation on farm, where farmers are inventorying their wildlife. So I've been with coffee farmers in Colombia, big macho guys with machetes who are competing with each other over how many migratory bird species they've got on their farms, right? You're starting to see significant changes in how you manage soil and water. You're starting to see a focus on climate resilience, because one of the things that farmers will need in order to deal with more extreme weather conditions and drought is to plant more trees, bring trees back to the farm landscape. So that's another area that we're working with them on. Workers' conditions, very, very poor working conditions in housing and healthcare for seasonal workers across the world. What farmers are seeing is when they build better housing, when they take care of the workers come back, they have less training to do with them, they're more efficient, and it ends up being a net positive for them. So how does this all work? We've got this comprehensive standard that 80% of it works for whatever crop in the tropics, which is where we're working currently, throughout the world. And it has broad areas that cover everything from ecosystem management to social and community engagement to chemical and water and soil use. And there's 100 criteria under all those things. The reason why there's 100 criteria is because, as you probably know, in farming throughout the world, there's very little what we call in this country extension or training or technical assistance for farmers. So they've been doing things the same way for hundreds of years, which doesn't take into consideration the shift that we have now, where we are suffering through the lack of resources and through civil strife and poverty. If you look at India's Green Revolution, while it did incredible things, it did it at the expense of water and enormous amounts of fertilizer use. So we've got to kind of re-engineer how we look at productivity and yield, how we look at farming, and how we help farmers really make those changes, become more competitive, more sustainable for a 21st century. So in addition to making the changes on the farm, this whole process also changes the black box of the supply chain and turns it into what people are increasingly calling it the value chain. So how does that happen? What happens with that? Well, we talked a bit about the change on the farm. And one of the interesting things that we're seeing is that farmers are now understanding that people are paying attention to what they're doing. And I had a young farmer tell me that, most of my friends went into the cities. They didn't want to do farm anymore. It's what their grandparents did. It wasn't sexy or enjoyable. But you know what? Now I see myself as a protector of the world's biodiversity and a provider of jobs, and I'm proud of that. And I think that that kind of approach is going to bring some of my friends back to coffee farming. So they're seeing their place in the world. They're engaged. Then if you move up the chain, what's happening is the traders who work traditionally with the farmers to then supply the product upstream are now themselves getting trained in sustainable practices so that they can go out and train the farmers, and then Rainforest Alliance or others will come and certify them. So they're shifting and learning, they're developing a whole set of expertise around sustainability in their own teams. Moving up, what we're seeing with the buyers, with the manufacturers, is that they are themselves, again, where the product used to show up at a special spec, they're now getting involved throughout their procurement operations, their brand management operations, their PR operations, to understand sustainability and embed it into their proposition, their value proposition, and to take risk out of their supply chain. So in a way that never happened before, many of them are visiting origin and beginning to understand their relationship and take responsibility for what's happening with the farmers. So becoming interested in how do they help improve yields, how do they ensure that soil quality is good for the long term, how do they make sure that there's not going to be labor issues. Retailers, you've all seen what's been happening with the Walmarts and Whole Foods and Marks and Spencers of the world, real shift in engagement in their proposition. And with consumers, what's interesting is that this whole engagement around sustainability and certification enables consumers to look for a label, but far beyond the label, it enables them to become engaged in origin. It enables them to become involved in sort of collaborative consumption, as was being talked about earlier. It gives them a way to engage with their food, to think about how food is produced, because you've got a story now. You've got an engagement. It's no longer a black box. It's no longer this thing that shows up just from your refrigerator. That's just beginning, but we're seeing that in the younger generation. We're seeing it, and the technology out there will enable people, to point their cell phone at a product and learn the story about it, maybe engage with the video of the farmer, et cetera. So all of these things are shifting. Good example, tea farm, a case in point, is in Kenya. At the scale, they're working with 500,000 small tea producers there who are changing how they're managing chemicals, changing how they manage water, changing their productivity and yield, and that's being driven by Lipton's 100% commitment to Rainforest Alliance certified. This is happening in terms of the process. What we're seeing is typically for each industry, you've got you've got series of smaller companies engaged, then a larger company make a very large mainstream commitment, then others come in behind that. And so then, we'll have 80% of the UKT certified within the next 5 years. We'll have, an incredible amount, like I say, 30% tea worldwide, and et cetera, in other sectors. And as I mentioned earlier, what we're also seeing is that when this really gets embedded in the company, you've got procurement, you've got brand managers, you've got a whole PR, you've got everybody engaged, the CEO, of course. So for those of you that are not in food, what do you take away from this? What's interesting about this? And Rainforest Alliance also works in forestry, in tourism, and we've been pioneering this approach there as well for the last 25 years. This is actually our 25th anniversary. But what have we learned from this? What is applicable, whether you're in financial services or mining or textiles or whatever? And we've actually heard in textiles earlier that people are looking at comprehensive management standards designed in multi-stakeholder processes. And why that matters is because you've got a much better collaborative model when you're hearing from all the different players, and you end up with a much better system, even if it's a pain to go through all that, and even if some of those contributions don't make any sense whatsoever. Second, clear targets set by buyers. When buyers say, like Unilever, I'm going to go for 100% sustainable sourcing, that sends a market signal that forces change, drives change to the system. We need that kind of engagement. Also, we need the suppliers to not drag their feet. The suppliers need to be actively engaged, like in food I was talking about with the traders, where they're training themselves and going out there actively working at the field level. You need to get that kind of real engagement. And that civil society and government need to be partnered in that process. I actually was just reading a document from Davos about sustainable consumption and production, and it was really well done, and something that Rainforest Alliance could have written. But in there was not one mention of civil society, which I found kind of shocking. So you need that engagement, exactly. And accountability and transparency through certification and auditing, really, really important. So I just want to say that I really, we're all in the process. We're in the middle of redesign and everything that we're all doing. It's very hard to see it sometimes because we're in the middle of it. It feels wrenching, difficult, feels like things aren't moving fast enough. But indeed, redesign and transformation is being mainstreamed in the food industry. We have a long way to go in that industry and others. But we're excited to be on this path towards a 21st century of sustainability. And you personally can also look for the Rainforest Alliance frog and buy products with the Rainforest Alliance certification from now on, I hope. So thank you very much, everybody.